What if your wiser, more experienced, more knowledgeable future self could do something then that would change your life in the past? And what if what your future self did or suggested or sent to you in terms of a feeling or a knowing or a hunch made you make better decisions and avoid some catastrophic ones? Would it help you pick the right job or the right person or avoid the wrong one? Would it help you possibly score higher on an exam that you took yesterday? It sounds really far-fetched, but in physics right now, the idea of retrocausality, or a backward causation, is kind of a hot and very controversial topic, and it's what Kathy and I are talking about today on this episode of Curious Explorers. If it sounds interesting, stay tuned.
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen.
Well, hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Curious Explorers. I'm your host, one of your hosts, Traci Stein, with the Kathy A. Kelly. And you may know her from the Paranormal Bookstore and Museum in Asbury Park, New Jersey. And Kathy, you have so many other titles and accolades. I wouldn't even know where to begin, but it's so good to
That's
see
why we
you.
go with the Kathy Kelly.
It's like Cher.
Yeah, well, the other reason that it's the is because everybody knows a Kathy Kelly. So
You're my only
it's a
one.
little joke. Really? Everybody went to high school with a Kathy Kelly. I guess people of a certain age, all went to high school with a Kathy Kelly.
I don't know.
It's good to see you too.
I picked what I think is going to be a great topic for today. I hope you like it too. And I think I'm going to entitle this podcast episode Precognition or Retrocausation. That is the question, right? And so what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about what those things are. Really, most people know what precognition is, but it's basically being able to tap into some future event, to know something in the future before it technically happens, if we're talking about linear time, which often on the show we won't be. And retrocausation, otherwise known as retrocausality. And that is something that a lot of people will be like, that's not possible, maybe until they hear this episode. Now, Kathy, have you heard of retrocausality, retrocausation before we get into this?
Only on a very kind of tangential kind of basis. So not something that I've ever, dipped into, but I have heard about it in relation to other phenomena.
Okay. Well, after today, you'll be like, I know all about it. So
Good.
Yay. Maybe we'll start harnessing the potential power of retrocausality and retrocausation. But the whole deal with that is the idea that something we do at a future time can impact the past. And the past could be now or the past from that time and so forth. But basically, it's like some future event somehow changing what we do. I'm going to think about it in the now, but for that time, it would be the past. And it's kind of a trippy concept. I've heard about this before. I've heard people talk about this in various paranormalist and sci circles. I was reading through this book by Eric Wargo that was highly regarded, Time Loops, Precognition, Retrocausation, and the Unconscious. So basically, the way Eric Wargo talks about it, he says retrocausation or retrocausality is really about influences of or in the future, exerting an influence on its past, right? So the past it could be, again, our now. It could be something in the past that is previous to our now. It could be something still in our future. So this kind of goes in the face of classical ideas of causality, where one thing happens after another. Linear time marches on in one direction, and that's forward, right? And that can be a very comfortable thing to just take as true. But what people have been talking about is, what if time is a two-way street, or just a street with lots of avenues off of it? I remember years ago, all of this brouhaha over Cornell University psychologist Daryl Bem, who was and still is a really well-known and respected social psychologist, published in top journals, but really wasn't out with talking about this kind of stuff. And then he published a series of experiments, one of them Feeling the Future, which stirred up a lot of controversy. And it really talks basically about retrocausality and precognition, both of which mainstream scientists still don't like to talk about. But the gist of the study was that participants in this experiment, in this case, his students, basically were placed in front of a computer and given a specific task. And the task was they had to guess and indicate whether the next photo that they would be shown was of an erotic nature, like something pretty racy, consensual, but erotic, unquestionably, or kind of more run-of-the-mill, kind of boring romantic. So boring romantic could be something like people hugging or people giving a chaste kiss or a wedding.
Mhm.
And the erotic would be unmistakably erotic. I don't think I probably have
No,
to
I was gonna say we need some examples of those, please, Traci. Just to put you on the spot, just to see what you come up as definitively erotic.
For anybody watching this on YouTube eventually, I'm glad I have the mild facial filter on that comes with StreamYard because I think I'm completely red right now. So again, students are sitting at a computer and basically before the next photo is shown, they have to indicate on a keyboard, is it erotic or is it kind of,
Mhm.
romantic but boring?
Right.
So here's where the retrocausation part comes in. The future event that would be shown, the future decision, the photo,
Mhm.
was not selected randomly until after they had already made their decision. And the computer just randomly generated a photo. But what's
Mhm.
interesting is that students were they were significantly above chance in their ability to correctly predict when it was going to be an erotic photo,
Mhm.
not above chance when it was a boring photo. So I'm going to have other examples, but just to kind of weigh in on this one a little bit.
So I
Yeah.
guess for me, my question would be, since the computer, so essentially what's happening is you're sitting you're sitting at a laptop, or if you were talking about back in the day, you're sitting at an IBM, and you're saying, I'm going to guess between A and B, right?
Yes.
A is romantic, B is overtly sexual,
Yes.
right? So A is white bread, B is pumpernickel. So
It's an
not that
everything bagel.
I find pumpernickel erotic.
Erotic.
It's just not,
It's
listen,
fancier.
I'm just gonna say, it's got a little spice to it, a little kick.
Yeah.
But the photo is not loaded yet, right?
It
So I'm
hasn't
gonna
been
pick
randomly
right.
selected
So it
even.
hasn't been selected yet. So I'm gonna pick A or B, and I'm wondering. To me, I'm wondering how many times did they just pick B? You know what I mean? Like, how many times were they just like, let's go with erotic, let's go with erotic, let's go with erotic, let's go? Because there does seem to be I would say at that age, a predisposition to, like, were these students who were aware of what the experiment was? Were they random students? Were they, you know what I mean? Were they part of and my only reason is
No,
that
those are great questions.
if I were 19 years old, I might, and I probably wouldn't. I'm a person that loves jury duty, so I'm probably not a person that, I like following the rules and everything. But I mean, I might just sit there and go erotic, 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 which I don't know whether that would skew the, skew the results or not, and I don't know whether or not that really matters. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know whether or not it really matters that someone's intent. You know what I mean? Well, I guess actually it would, right? I mean, that's the entire
It's
kind
a
of what we're
great
talking about.
You have great questions. You honestly could be a social scientist, and because those are excellent questions. So just to let you know, usually this was a pool of undergraduates saying, "Yes, I'm gonna sign up to be in a psychology experiment." Then
Mhm.
they're kind of randomly allocated to different studies.
Right.
So you get a variety of types of students and personalities. Usually, and I would have to go back and reread the paper because I don't remember, but usually for all of these things, there is what you're told the experiment's about. beforehand, and then you're debriefed after. So you're usually
Mhm.
not told explicitly what the aim of the experiment is. I don't know. I don't remember what the instructions were to them at the time. I can honestly tell you, you know, most people aren't just going to hit B, 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 B.
Right, right,
That
right.
would be a huge deviation from chance, and you can control for that statistically. I think a lot of students also wanna be correct. So, but those are excellent questions.
Did
There
you
was a
ever see
series
the,
of about 11 studies that
right.
measured psi in different ways, just so you know.
Well, the reason why I bring it up is the opening scene to Ghostbusters. I don't know if if you
A
I
while
don't
ago
know
for
if
me.
you went to Ghostbusters if you reference Ghostbusters quite as often as I do,
I've
but
never done it.
Bill Murray. So the basis of Ghostbusters is that the guys who make up the Ghostbusters are all, with the exception of one, are all scientists, and they are all I want to say they're actually teaching at either NYU or Columbia, but they are all doing different field work to prove the existence of psi and paranormal phenomena. And Bill Murray's character is doing a highly questionable, statistical test of psi. And I do encourage you to watch the opening scene.
I'm gonna
Um,
rewatch it.
yeah, please do. But I mean, I guess when you're describing it to me, and to me, statistical evidence is incredibly compelling. When you're talking about something that's that's above or beyond what we would consider to be chance, this is stuff that you really, if you can go back and look at the controls put on experiments, like, this is legit, and you're talking about something that's really, really compelling. I will say, if somebody is willing to put their name out on a paper about subject matter that is so challenging for mainstream
To find,
academics
yeah.
to look at, to me, that's about as ballsy as you can get, I mean, that's bravery on a level, so when I'm asking questions, these are just purely curiosity
They're
questions,
excellent
because once they're
questions.
put out there.
Well, what's interesting, aside from the fact that you have great questions, is that I think he had 11 studies in total that he published about. This caused huge uproar. All of these people, basically felt like he had kind of lost his marbles
Right.
doing this. We could spend a whole other podcast talking about that too. The idea with retrocausality, before I go on to the next study, was that because the computer randomly selected photos after the students had made their selections, the idea was that targets, so the thing you're trying to correctly view, whatever it is, the thing you're trying to discern psychically, if they are more intense emotionally or more stimulating in some way, they tend to be easier to view. So just as a
Mhm.
quick aside, if you give somebody, like in the remote viewing world, I remember people talking about, I think it was Stefan Schwartz and Russ Harg talking about this at a training I did years ago with them, that I took with them. Like, it's easier to view a nuclear reactor than, like, a lit candle. I mean, a nuclear reactor is obviously literally more energy, but it
It's bigger, it's louder, it's it's
there
momentous.
and there are things that are psychically loud.
Right.
So, it doesn't surprise me that the significance wasn't in the other direction. So, the idea with retrocausality is, did the type of target influence
Right.
which one they picked up on more often? And I'm gonna say probably yes.
So
Um,
so just a
yeah,
question on that
yeah,
for my,
yeah.
so how do you know they predicted it and they didn't cause it?
So that would be telekinesis, and that would be an alternative argument. Well, I'm gonna tell you about the next experiment
Okay,
because
I'm
that
sorry. I'm
no, I
sorry.
mean, that seems pretty retrocausal to me. So in another experiment on a memory test, which was recalling a list of words, and, like, people tend to you can say on average how many words people will remember
Yeah.
later, from a list of words that they were given. I don't remember if it was like 25 words or whatever. But he found that students had greater recall of words after the experiment. Remember, these are all smart Cornell
Hmm.
students, so they probably had higher
Right.
recall than average anyway, but they had greater recall after the experiment if they were shown those words after the experiment was done. So basically, if they were shown the list of words later, like, "Oh, just so you know, as a reminder, now you've already given your results. You've already been prompted. You've had to recall. You've
That's
done it. You've
weird.
been scored. And now we're gonna show you the list again, and we're gonna let you read the list again.
But you've already scored them.
You've already scored. It's already done."
That's weird.
So can I just tell you that when I was a doctoral student, I remember hearing about this and making sure that after an exam, I would, if there was an opportunity to see what the correct answers were, because why not hedge your bets?
Right, right.
Um, but the idea is that having seen the correct words later on made them more likely to be correct earlier on. So that again is a future event influencing the past. But again, this was considered heretical. But what it made me think of is actually way back in the day, hundreds of years ago, everybody thought the world was flat. If you said the world was round, it could be life-threatening.
Right.
So, to me, this is it may be something that won't be such a big deal before we know it. I want to give you a remote viewing example, both one just describing it and then showing you something. And we'll put this in the YouTube video, so anybody who's listening might want to go and check that out as well.
Right.
So just a quick thing, associative remote viewing. Remote viewing is a type of psychic technology. It's very structured. It was developed largely by the US military in conjunction with Stanford Research Institute and people like Ingo Swann back in the 1970s. But the difference between this and, say, tarot card reading or just tuning in or whatever, it's a very structured, sometimes tedious discipline. But there's been a lot more testing of this particular discipline. Now, with outcomes that can be categorical, right? So that they can be there's no kind of like continuum. It's A, B, C, D, or yes or no, or you win or you lose. They can be binary. You can do something called associative remote viewing. And actually, on my podcast, my most recent episode, I had Marty Rosenblatt on. He's a physicist. He founded the Applied Precognition Project. And that's his thing. He does one of his many things, but associative remote viewing. Now, associative remote viewing says that it's going to be harder for me to tell if I just want to view it. I'm going to use the World Series example. If the Yankees are going to win the 2025 World Series, right? There's so much potential noise, with other teams that might be playing or other images or whatever. If you just want to split it into they win or they don't win, that becomes easier. And it becomes easier still if you associate something else, completely unrelated but easy to identify with each possible outcome. So this is typically done by selecting randomly photo sites, photos of something else, one to represent outcome A, the Yankees win the World Series, and outcome B, the Yankees lose the World Series. So often this is done with, can be done by computer generated random images. It can be done by having 100, photos in different sealed envelopes. And you randomly pick one to represent A and one to represent B. So I just want to set that out there for anybody who's new to remote viewing. And several years ago now, Jason and I went to the Applied Precognition Conference.
Who's Jason? Who is this Jason
Yeah,
person?
this Jay guy, my husband, Jason. So, and
Awesome
this is,
guy, by the way. Awesome guy.
thank you. This is relevant because he did not want to go. I had to drag him kicking and screaming to this quote, boring thing he didn't want to do. He wanted to just stay in the hotel room. But here we were in Henderson, Nevada at this conference. And really the only thing to do out at this hotel was to wager on like sporting events, which I know nothing about. I still don't understand the concept of over, under, even. Like you'd have to explain it to me 100 times. I'm like very dense with that. But it was also a lot of presentations on remote viewing and a lot of practice. So I wanted to use the example of Jason's remote viewing because he hadn't ever done it before. I'm going to bring retrocausation into this in a moment. Here we would usually have a few practice sessions a day, and Marty Rosenblatt would say, all right, we're going to go wager. You actually would place bets. I'm not a gambler, by the way. This is the only time I've ever done this. But outcome A is whatever and outcome B is whatever. And you would have like a minute to kind of clear your mind and cool down. And then in this kind of clearer space in your mind, you would notice the images, feelings, thoughts, sensations that came to mind. And you would have like 5 or 10 minutes tops to just sketch. But you would have the intention. Intention is key. Using our other example, it could be like the Yankees win or don't win the World Series.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So Jay, who's miserable and doesn't want to be there.
Miserable Jay.
Miserable Jay. Sorry.
He's such a lovely guy. We're laughing.
We can all be
because
miserable.
Jay is a good guy. He's a good sport.
Thank you. But he was miserable that day. He was
Yeah,
miserable.
right.
He's kind of miserable. So he clears his mind. He said, and also we had Play-Doh because it's great if you can sculpt what you see.
Mm-hmm.
That you have this three. Some people are better with that, whatever. So I'm going to see if I can share it, Kathy. Can you see this?
I can.
All right. Good thing I don't have any weird stuff on.
Yeah, good thing you
don't have any erotic photos. All right.
Wait, I stand corrected.
All right. So what you're looking at here is in this space of about 5 to 10 minutes, what Jason drew. Now, again, remember the question then was, what's the over under of this, whatever sporting event that is going to be happening today at 6 p.m. or whatever it is. So this is what he drew. First time ever. You can probably see what you think it looks like. You want to describe what it looks like? What does it look like to you?
It looks like an oncoming train.
I love that you're saying oncoming train, because the perspective clearly looks like that. It looks like an oncoming old school train. It doesn't look like an Amtrak.
Like a locomotive. Full disclosure, to me, it looks like Abraham Lincoln's train, that carried his, like, that's how I would reference it, because in my mind, I'm very familiar with that. To me, it looks like a locomotive,
I think that's
on a track, coming right at you.
Absolutely. And
I don't know what the right looks like to me, but that's what I see. I see a train, I see a track, I see the steam or the coal stack, I see the front of it. That's what it looks like to me.
Awesome. And you can see the tracks are also, separately drawn, a piece of curved tracks, but he's not naming it. He's describing it, which is the whole thing with remote viewing. And he wrote various descriptors up here. It's hard to see, but things like black, metal or metallic, boxy. Over here, what looks like, I think, the grill in the front of an old fashioned train, the hills, the tracks, so forth, and some little person down here. So now I'm going to show you what the A and B pictures were. Now, and then I'm going to explain what the retrocausal part is. So if you had that drawing and those descriptors, what's the likelihood you would have picked A?
Based on him, based on what Jason?
Based on what he drew, yeah.
Oh, no, I wouldn't have picked A at all.
Right. There's nothing there. And here you see an old-fashioned locomotive with the circular thing and the stack and this
the track.
thing, the tracks, this like fan-like, it's metallic clearly. This is black.
It's boxy.
Correct. The tracks, the grass. Here's the thing about that. Marty had a shuffled stack of, I'm going to say at least 30, maybe more sealed envelopes that somebody had brought in that morning of randomly selected and very different photos. And after we were all done viewing, we're all separately doing this. I don't even remember what my sketch was. He pulled out the photo for A, which wound up being the two monkeys. And he pulled out randomly out of the pile and opened the sealed envelope and pulled out B, a photo of that oncoming old-fashioned train. So Jay's drawing was like, I can't think of anything that wasn't correct about that, except the little tiny person that we didn't see, but you can assume is driving the train.
Right.
So based on that, we bet, and, we're correct. But based on the collective drawings and the general vote, more people had stuff that related to photo B and pick that. The retrocausal part of that is that the targets weren't even selected till after everyone was done viewing. And what someone could argue is precognition. You're tuning into something you will see in the future. But what a lot of remote viewers would say is the fact that you're seeing the feedback, right? It's not that you'll never see the photos. You're seeing it. And is the act of seeing it causing you to remember a future event in what is the past to that future event?
Right.
So that's the whole thing. And I think they could be related. I think it's precognitive and I think it's retrocausal because we know that people don't do quite as well when they don't get
Right.
feedback.
But I mean, it actually offers something of an explanation for precognition. When you talk about like, it actually makes me think of time as a rubber band versus linear. You know what I mean? And maybe it's a rubber band for, a minute maybe there's a limitation as to how, like for instance, maybe you can have an impact for a specific distance or I don't want to say amount of time. When we've discussed precognition in the past, I mean that's part of the problem with precognition is how much of the future is predetermined and how much of it is not, and it kind of I don't know, makes precognition make a little bit more sense because you're still impacting the future and the past if you're involved in the way that you're describing. I guess to me, what would be hard is the fact that there's no functional way for us to understand what's happening. We have the evidence of the result without having evidence of the function or the kind of practical aspect of what's actually happening, which is of course how all of paranormal studies are at this point. You know what I mean? It's really interesting though. It's very, very
It
interesting.
is.
I would wonder if the novelty of Jason impacted his, you know what I mean? Like in the
I
fact that it
love
was
that you said
utterly
that.
new to him, in the fact that it was utterly new to him, and therefore he didn't have any kind of historical training. Him just being a total novice, did that impact it?
That's such an incredible point. I feel like there's some telepathy going on maybe. I don't know, which, we can talk about that here. First of all, I think people tend to do better at things generally if they're curious. So if you do
Hmm.
well with novel kind of situations, some people like do worse when it's novel, right? Because they're like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm averse to it. But some people are excited and curious. And actually, you will remote view better if you maintain an attitude of curiosity.
Right.
And you're right, there was not any conditioning, or it's not boring because he hasn't done it 1,000 times. There is some sort of beginner's success thing with remote viewing
Hmm.
too, and also with other psychic studies. You're probably aware that I think it was like, with the Zener cards and JB Ryan, I think people
Right.
did really well for the first zillion trials, and then their success rates would fall off because they just got really bored.
And I also think that there's that excitement of success. So,
Absolutely.
when you're first open to something and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm just going to go. Once you understand kind of what the game is, I think we always lean into winning it, whether there's a winning or a losing to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's not, if I'm just guessing or I'm just tuning in and saying, yeah, I'm going to take whatever's coming to me, and there's no losing and there's no winning in the beginning, it's exciting, especially because you're like, wow, you guessed it. That's amazing. I'm trying to think. Was it Ted Sirios? Do you know who Ted Sirios is?
You know what? I remember the name because Stephen Browdy, prolific author, very well known in the paranormal kind of science, the science
Hmm.
world, has referenced. I've seen him speak and he's referenced Ted Sirios, but I
Yeah.
don't remember. Tell me more. Tell
I
us
think so. I
more.
think I think he's a little bit more pop than he is, than he is scientific. He was around in the 60s, early 70s, kind of around the same time that Peter Hurkos was. And he was I guess you would call him a remote viewer. Yeah, he was able to take his images and impart them onto undeveloped film. And when the film was then developed, the image of what he saw would be there. And one of the things that was interesting that he did was he was asked to imagine, I think it was the Birdcage Theater in the OK Corral, wherever the OK Corral happened. And he said, okay, I'll do that. And he imagined it, and I might be wrong at the specific, but it was one of these famous kind of Old West places. And when they developed the film, it was this particular hotel, but the name of the hotel was misspelled. So he had misspelled it in his thinking.
That is
And
crazy.
I mean, honestly,
It's
that's
like,
crazy.
yeah,
But the reason I bring him up is that the more he became involved in kind of proving what he was doing, the less successful he was, because kind of in the beginning, it was something that he did. And it was like, I do this. I don't know how it's happening or why it's happening, but I do this. But as it became more important that he do it, he became less able. And I don't mean that in a way that seems fraudulent. I mean that it's almost like it broke the ability in him, the importance of what he was doing as far as being accepted or being right, or being successful, eliminated his ability to do it. And not totally. It became more and more difficult for him.
it's uncanny, pun intended,
Yeah.
that you are mentioning this, because when I was trying to think about what to do for, what topic we should explore for this episode, I was looking at all these things, and one was about telekinesis, which it sounds like Ted Sirios, that's what that is, right? I mean, your mind or something is affecting matter,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
So he's essentially taking a photograph in a way with his mind.
Right.
So I was looking at, the person who's most kind of getting the most traction for this now is somebody named Sean McNamara. I have never met him. I have seen him present again at the Applied Precognition kind of online things, but he's got a ton of YouTube videos about telekinesis. So one of his things is to like have a glass hurricane, but turned upside down so no air gets in it, and a needle on top of an eraser, right? And then a piece of tinfoil over it. And he shows you how to move objects with your mind. And he teaches people how to do this. But what's interesting is one of the things he was talking about in one of his recent videos was don't be thinking about moving the
Right.
object, whether it's a tinfoil or
Mhm.
bending the spoon or whatever, that actually gets in the way. And in fact, he was showing how when he was doing Qigong, which was something newer to him, and moving his energy at some point, not focused on the hurricane with the foil, he caused it to move. Um,
Right.
and it sounds like the same kind of phenomenon. And I think it's just easy for us to get in our way when we need to be right. This is like a huge, total, like winding path. So hopefully everybody's good with
Right.
walking
Right.
this path with us today. But it's like, there are old school remote viewers, and I'm sure people who do it now too, but I don't know about it. But like people like Russell Targ, like they back in the day, and I think in the 80s, had a huge winning streak. It might have been like 20 things in a row where they were able to wager on silver futures.
Mhm.
They accurately predicted whether they would go up or down, and made, I think then, like $100,000, which it's not small amount today, but then forget it. It was a lot, a lot, a
Right.
lot. But then at one point it just stopped working. And,
Mhm.
whether it's the investment in being right for the sake of being right, or the urgency of feeling like, oh no, I've got to do this because I've got to make this
Right.
money, or performance anxiety. And I also do think like any kind of repeated task, when you're good at it and it's new, it's novel and it's stimulating, over
It's
time, everything
exciting.
gets
Mhm.
it gets
Right.
less exciting. So the decline makes sense to me over time.
Mhm.
But I had some questions for us to ponder. And we're gonna look at precognition and retrocausation, say, well, what is it? Is it both? Is it one or the other? Because we talked about precognitive dreams in a different
Right.
episode. So if somebody has a precognitive dream, is the future event exerting an impact on our consciousness in the now? So the past as it relates to the future event. Because if we have a dream that causes us to do something differently, if it's a desirable outcome, we maybe do something differently and to make that outcome more likely. If it's a scary outcome, like, oh, we see ourselves in a car accident, we change how we drive, and maybe that averts it. What do you think of all that? By the way, if we do something to make that outcome less likely or not happen, then the precognitive hit is wrong technically because we've made it wrong. You and I talked about that. But what
Right.
is that? Is that retrocausality? Or is that just simply precognition? Or is it both?
This this seems like two sides of the same coin, right? Where or hand in hand. The one thing that I would say is, generally speaking, we're talking about precognitive dreams that we have the ability to impact, right?
Good
So
point.
if I have maybe all of our dreams are precognitive. We don't know.
Good
Like,
point.
if you have a dream about, somebody in a submarine in Australia, and you wake up and you're like, I had the weirdest dream. There was this guy and he was in Australia and he was a submarine, and he, a dolphin saved him, and and then the dolphin died. I mean, it's a weird dream, but maybe there's a guy in Australia that, now has a pet dolphin. But
As one
so
does.
there, yeah, as one does in Australia. But I mean, so I think if the dream is a dream about us and our choices and our experiences, and it's truly a precognitive dream. And unfortunately, we only know about precognitive dreams when we do not change the outcome. Right. So it's like, you could say, oh my God, I had a
Correct.
dream last night where, the Christmas tree lights caught fire. So, and then, that night you unplug those Christmas tree lights. You know what I mean? So, was that a precognitive dream? Maybe. But if you didn't unplug them and the house caught fire, then you would say she had a dream that happened, and it happened. And the only time that we kind of know about those dreams are when we have them, we talk about them, and we don't do something to affect the outcome and the result, right? So to me, that would be precognition and not retrocausality, because you didn't make the changes. But when you have positive dreams, right? We First of all, we tend not to remember positive dreams, or we remember the feeling of those dreams. We don't really remember the details of them. And, a lot of times you'll wake up and be like, wow, I had the best dream last night. And then it wisps away. Maybe because we don't feel an impetus to make changes to make that happen. So, I had a dream I won the lottery. Maybe we buy a ticket. Maybe that's the one case, where we're, but if you're like, I had a dream that I went to lunch with Traci, and, she had the avocado toast, and, I had a
Had
big steak.
avocado today.
Did you? Oh
I
my God, I
actually
dreamt about
did,
that.
like, an hour ago.
But oh my God, I dreamt about that. But, and then, and then all of these positive things happen. It's not something that I think of having to do anything to bring to fruition. It's just a dream that I have, but it could be something that I could bring to fruition. But when it comes to negative stuff, when it comes to things that we're going to have kind of a traumatic response to, or is going to impact us traumatically, we tend to pay more attention to that. And again, I don't know, because if it doesn't come to fruition, maybe it is retrocausality. Maybe we have done those little ripples in the pond that do enough to change the outcome. And a lot of times when I'm doing seances, or I'm doing different things here at Paranormal, people will say, well, how do you do that? Or how does that happen? And I've often said, I don't know, maybe it's the right shampoo. Maybe I had the right thing for life. I literally don't. I know there's a formula to it, but I don't know what the formula is. And I don't think it's necessarily big things. I think little things can be very, 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 very impactful. So to me, those dreams that we have that we're able to make the changes in are both precognitive and evidence of retrocausality, right? In fact, maybe really good evidence of that, right? Because maybe in our dream state, we're in the future. I don't know. I mean, like the multiverse and, different things like
It's an
that.
easy sell
Um,
for me.
yeah, I know. You're an easy person to share that with.
I'm
Anybody
like,
else would
all
be like, yeah,
right.
maybe. You're like, maybe. I don't know. Could have been. But
It
I
probably
think
was.
that it makes as much sense as anything else. I think, though, the dreams that we have where we don't cause a deviation and are probably true examples of precognition, and with which also leads you to believe that retrocausality is a choice that we make, and at least something we participate in. It doesn't just naturally happen. We have to do something to have it, in those cases at least.
There has
That
to
would
be
be
some sort of effect that it's like something has to
that you
change
do,
based on
right?
what we pick up
Hmm.
on.
Right. Hmm. In those cases, which is not to say in other cases, but in those cases, yes.
So I don't know if it feels like there's still energy behind this topic or not. I had an example that Lynn Buchanan shared with our class. For people who don't know, Lynn Buchanan, Sergeant Lynn Buchanan, was one of the original military remote viewers, an intelligence personnel for U.S. military intelligence. He's a very data-oriented guy. So what he started doing a long time ago is, I don't think I would have the discipline to do this, but every day, at the end of the day, he would write down in his journal the decisions he made that he thought were good and the decisions he made that he thought weren't great. And he would send energy or the intention and the thought back to his previous self, reinforcing the good decisions at the moment that he made them and kind of discouraging him from the ones that he wanted to be different. So the first year, I think he probably thought these were a little bit above chance that his decisions got better. I mean, again, this is somebody who's literally tracking all this. I can't imagine myself. I can't track what I eat
Right.
for a week. But over the years, he said statistically significant improvements happened with his ability to make good decisions. And what he noticed was feeling in the moment, especially before major decisions, having a strong feeling that he took to be his future self, communicating to his present self, like this direction, not that. And one example that he gave was, I guess he and his wife had been looking to find a house. They found this house that seemed like the perfect house. It was the right price. It was beautiful. It was in a great location. It had everything that they really wanted. And when he went to sign the contract, he had such a strong feeling that this was not a good decision. All of a sudden, that he just said, I'm not signing this contract. And that must have been a big to-do, especially I'm
Yeah.
sure the
We've
realtors.
all, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
we've all
sure
been
that,
there.
sure people were very upset.
Yes. And for whatever reason, it turned out that would actually not have been a good house. I can't remember if there was something environmental or whatever. And he
I
wound up,
think you should say it blew up. Like it's got, like it blew
there's
up.
some mudslide and
It got
you know,
swept away,
swept
in a
away.
terrible, swept away.
But and then he found the right one, and it felt so right. It wasn't just logically right. And and like honestly, somebody who's recently bought another house,
Right.
like after 3 years of looking for the quote right thing, I think the reason why I felt such suffering after selling one that was a practical decision a few years ago, but it didn't feel great, was how awful that I wound up feeling because we hadn't found what we were looking for. It took another
Right.
3 years.
Right.
The craziness of that for the house I'm in now is that one day Jay and I were walking down the street in this house that we had never given another thought to. Well, actually wasn't our taste. We were like, it's not that great. But all of a sudden it looked different. We walked
Right.
by it and we're like, hey, this could work. And it checked all these weird boxes. And we made an offer sight unseen. Also, because the market is nuts. And we just had to. But the point is the feeling changed and it was so crystal clear.
Right.
And I had really put it out there. I want to feel at home. I want to
Right.
feel at peace. I want to feel like I've made a good decision.
Right.
And I actually think my future self was like, all right, I'm going to try this because I don't think I've ever felt so at ease in a place. And it's not that there isn't a laundry list of things to do,
No,
but
no, that has nothing to do with it. No, that has nothing to do with it. Yeah.
it's literally the feel. And I feel like with big decisions, we should all make a practice of telling our previous self, this is going to work out, or this is what is going to be a great decision. This is how you're going to feel.
Right.
Really communicate with that previous you. And I feel like even if it's just psychological, it's of some benefit, but I think we actually are communicating with our previous selves. I actually think that's retrocausality. That's it.
It's funny because when I was coming up with a list of subjects that I want to, look at, one of the things that I did on my other podcast was I did homes, houses, and how we attach to them, and why, and how and why we attach to them. And it's funny because I think when you talk to people and they talk about these momentous decisions that they're making, and buying a home is a momentous decision, especially
Without
at
a doubt.
certain points in your life, at
Oh my
certain
God.
points in your life where you're like, this is where I'm going to invest me. This is where I'm going to build my life. This is where I'm going to stitch together the fabric of a life, and not to overstate it, but
You're not
I think
overstating.
that no, I think at especially at certain points in your life, right? At certain, your first house, maybe maybe the house that you're like, okay, we're more established and we're doing these things. But houses, and that particular choice, I think, is one of those choices that, as people, we look at it, we talk about it clinically, we talk about it very kind of forensically, we talk about it very kind of academically, but it is incredibly emotional, and there are all of these fibers and tentacles of emotion that are kind of built into it. And so I think that I like the fact that you use that as an example, because I literally am writing that podcast right now. You know what I mean? Like, it's part of what I'm doing. So there's this weird synchronicity kind of running through this entire
Oh my
subject
goodness.
matter,
And this
that I
episode.
think is funny. That's what I mean. Like, it's funny that it's in this episode. It wasn't in another one that we talked about, kind of precognition. It was in one where, and I mean, personally, I'm looking for a home right now. So, and you wait for that moment when you walk in, where you're waiting. I always call it the universe, right? I always say, oh,
Yeah,
the
me
universe
too.
just told me this. I had a couple of weird situations with that yesterday with my mom, but I think it's an interesting thing that in this particular episode, at this particular moment with you and I, and the fact that you use that as an example to me, you know what I mean, with everything that I'm kind of, the process that I'm going through now. To me, that's kind of evidentiary. You know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
there's some evidentiary thing. So, in answer to your question was to whether or not there was, still a little gas for the subject matter, I would say yes. I would say yes.
So, Kathy, we should make sure we'll always put these things in the show notes, but we should make sure that you let everybody know the name of your podcast, because we want them to
Yes.
check out not only Curious Explorers, but
Paranormal Universe with Kathy Kelly. And yours.
and mine is Unpacking Possibility with Dr. Traci Stein. All of these are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, YouTube, and probably elsewhere as well.
Yes.
So maybe that's a good point for us to kind of wrap it up. But Kat, thanks for joining me, and everyone, thanks so much for listening. We're so excited to have you as a part of our inaugural season of Curious Explorers with Kathy and Traci.
Take care, you guys.
This has been another episode of Curious Explorers. If you liked the episode, please remember to like, share, follow, leave us a comment. It really does help us continue bringing more interesting, intriguing, spooky, and paranormal content to you.